Welcome to the Sage Thought Leadership Podcast, transforming the way people think and work so their organizations can thrive. Well, hi everyone, and welcome to our podcast. I'm Ed Kless, and today's episode is cut from another podcast of which I am the co-host, The Soul of Enterprise, which is also sponsored by Sage. The Soul of Enterprise is dedicated to belief that business has a spiritual, though not necessarily religious, component. I hope you enjoy this excerpt. If you do, please visit www.thesoulofenterprise.com for more.
You had Blair Enns on your show on February 9th. It was a terrific discussion about strategy. You know, all the cliches about, what's the definition of strategy? It's one of those terms that when you ask people and they have to really think about it, they don't really know what they mean by strategy. Well, it's knowing what not to do. Well, it means having a plan, having a smart plan, all these things.
Yeah.
And Blair's favorite strategy or definition was, he's got a weird hobby too, by the way. He collects definitions of strategy. I thought that was great. We've had Blair on the show. I love Blair. He's great. He's really brilliant. But his favorite definition is strategy is the idea that describes a journey to a position of advantage. And I thought that was pretty interesting. But you have a very interesting favorite definition. What's yours?
Yeah. So here's the thing. Before I jump into that, because mine's long and it's longer than the songwriter in me likes. Like I like things to be a little bit more concise and boom, 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 like rhythm to it. My definition is kind of long, but there's a really specific reason for it, because I think the one that you just shared from Blair is right, but it's not helpful. I don't find it to be helpful. I think it's right, but I don't think it's helpful. So I have sort of a long definition that I think is correct and helpful to someone who's trying to get their head around what strategy is so they can start selling it, so they can start selling their brains instead of selling their hands. Stop thinking about the labor and start thinking about the transformation. If you want to sell strategy, which is something I try and help people do, you need to understand what it is first. So my definition is that strategy is a concise, high-level approach to achieving an objective by playing strengths against weaknesses in an unexpected way. And I know that's a giant mouthful, but I've tried so hard to cut any single word out of there, and I can't without it losing an important descriptive character.
I love that definition. I especially like the surprise. And Blair even alluded to this on the conversation with you, but it was, there is it comes from George Gilder. It's the information theory of capitalism, which is information equals surprise, right? Creativity and innovation always takes us by surprise. And that's why that definition is so great. And we've had on Rory Sutherland in his book, Alchemy, he talks about, if your strategy doesn't have an element of surprise, it's kind of worthless. He compares it to the military. You've got to have an element of surprise. Otherwise, the enemy knows what you're up to.
Yeah. I've discussed that surprise piece with my mailing list of thousands of people on this daily mailing list. And I talked about strategy a lot around the time of that episode. And I got some pushback about the surprise piece. And I don't want to qualify it really, but there is an argument to be made that if the objective is small, or if it's an infinite game situation where there's no winner and loser, it's just an objective that you want to get to, then the surprise might not come into play as much or be as important versus an extremely high stakes winner take all situation where I think it is absolutely critical.
Right. Yeah, no, it's really hard because of all these definitions, like you say, many of them are not helpful. And then when you start parsing the ones even that you like, you run into these walls. I'll give you mine, and it comes from Jules Goddard. He wrote a book called Uncommon Sense, Common Nonsense, management professor out of the UK. And I love this because it speaks to me. Get your take on it. Strategy is the rare and precious skill of staying one step ahead of the need to be efficient.
That's interesting.
What I love about that is it bakes in innovation. But like you said, if that's not the goal, if your goal is to maybe be low-cost leader, whatever, I think this strive to be efficient is an innovation destroyer. I mean, innovation, creativity is the antithesis
Yeah,
vision.
Blair's, not to name check Blair again, but he was the first one. I think it was an article on his blog where he said that you can't optimize creativity. They're the opposites. Like they're opposite ends of the spectrum. So whether it's innovation or whatever, like you can't optimize it. It's optimization comes later, and it's not creative. It's after the creative act. So, and I also, while we're name checking people, I hasten to mention that the definition of strategy that I use is largely learned from Richard Rumelt in his excellent book, Good Strategy, Bad Strategy.
Yeah. A bit dense, but yeah, good. It was a thought-provoking book.
Yeah.
Yeah. We've only got about a minute, but I got to ask you about this too. Pricers have I think, a pretty interesting saying: innovate for growth, price for profit. How do you think and advise your customers around innovation? Is that, and I'm not just talking about, the new iPhone. I'm talking about innovation broadly.
Mm-hmm.
How do you think about it?
For my students who are innovating in their own business, this is going to sound like a cop out, but it's so easy to innovate. It's almost not even innovative. There's like the industry is so commoditized and static at this point, software development, that simply adding like a subscription service or some kind of one-off strategy workshop or software architecture workshop, it comes across as innovative because just nobody does it. So I am a huge fan of innovation. I think it's super important, but it's really easy to be innovative in software at the moment.
Yeah. No, I that's been my experience too. And just, we always talk about, you can innovate your language, you can innovate your sales approach, the questions you ask, your why conversation can be part of massive innovation.
Review and subscribe by searching your podcast player of choice for Sage Thought Leadership Podcast.